Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman podcast.
I'm going to start by saying, gosh, I'd love to look at you and say, we must never lie. But, I'll just use the classic when your wife says, how do I look in this? So don't tell me that we don't have, that there isn't a little gray in our conversation. That said, I really believe that telling the truth is almost takes a level of discipline, because the mind fools us. We say, well, they didn't really ask that, or we did that Tuesday, maybe not Wednesday. We find little outs, little niches to say, I'm kind of telling the truth.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show, where we help you not just hit your sales target, but really thrive in sales. Click subscribe if you haven't already, and let's meet today's guest.
Well, I'm Rob Jolles. The book is Why People Don't Believe You, and it can be found in bookstores. It's on airport promotions right now, so it's in the airports, which is nice. Bookstores, Amazon, online stores, wherever books are sold.
On this episode with Rob, we're diving into why people just don't believe you, both in sales and in life in general. We're diving into some real practical ways that you can improve your credibility. And so let's jump into the show. First off, somewhat of a leading question, because I think I know where you'll go with it, but how much of the prospect customer believing salespeople is screwed up down to the fact that salespeople don't believe themselves? They do not believe in their products, their services. They believe that they're trying to pitch, cheat, lie, that they're trying to just close the deal, even if perhaps they don't believe fully in the value that they're going to give. How much of a downside is that just to sales in general?
Well, downsides, I think it'll cost you your career. And really, I think it cost me my career when I was 21 years old. I was selling for the New York Life Insurance Company. No doubt that insurance, life insurance, health insurance, disability insurance, very important products. But for a 21-year-old selling a bunch of 21-year-olds life insurance and insuring insurability, I mean, I had a leg to stand on barely, but insuring insurability. What happened was that my numbers were really good, but it caught up with me almost emotionally. I'm selling people a product they don't need. Of course we need life insurance, but I'm not so sure single males without a family, without children, need life insurance at the age of 21. But I did what the manager told me, and I went out there and I lit some fires and got people to buy. It wasn't my numbers that cost me my career at New York Life. It was the feeling that I'm selling people something that I'm not sure I believe in. And that's the problem. We don't want to lose our career over this.
And how does that translate to the person that you're stood there speaking to? If you don't believe in it, is it difficult for them to believe in you, or is it possible to mask it and hide it, and for you to deep down be like, oh shit, I don't want to be talking about this because I feel way out of my depth, but externally you're exuding confidence?
Yeah, in the book, there's many things, and some of them are really painfully simple. So I'm going to give you one right now, but it's simple, but just think about it for a second. The easiest way to be believed, one of the easiest ways to be believed and sound authentic, is to tell the truth. Now you think about that for a moment, okay? When we, look, we can believe it. We can believe our stories for so long. But when sometimes it's us and we don't believe in us, and certainly can't turn our tactics loose to teach you how to get other people to believe in you when you don't believe in you. But sometimes it's us and sometimes it's our product. And but between the two of them, we may be able to mask it for a day, a week, a month, but eventually it's like musical notes. Instead of here, it's here. It's flat. It's we go out, this is the best product you'll ever take. It's missing that music, and it's hard to sustain it when you don't believe.
We'll come on back onto telling the truth in a second, so I think that's worth diving in a little deeper. But how much of all this is, and you alluded to it then, Rob, how much of this is subtle changes in the tonality of our voice? Perhaps we are sat with our arms crossed rather than our arms by our side. And how much of us presenting ourselves as being credible and trustworthy, how much of it is external that people can pick up on?
Well, that's a great question. So some of it are tactics and some of it's right here in the head. And if you ever want an example of why I say it's here in the head, for any of us, for you, think about when you've had 3 or 4 interviews, great interviews. The interview person was pretty good, but you were on fire. You just found the questions. You made somebody who wasn't interesting. You just nailed it, and you nailed 2 or 3 in a row. How do you approach the fourth one? You strut in front of that microphone. You expect to be successful. Well, the same thing can happen. Of course, the opposite. We can go 3 or 4 losses. We can just get our heads handed to us on a couple of sales. Ones we were close on, ones we got blown out of the water 3 or 4 times. What does the fifth one sound like? Now the music starts going down. So a lot of it is right here. And the funny thing is, one of the best tactics that I'm working with right now is actually to study the way a method actor works. The way if somebody has to feel empathy or emotion on stage, they don't smack themselves in the head and go, be empathetic. Come on now, be empathetic. What they do is they take themselves to a moment where they felt that. Imagine if we get our words lined up and then we take ourselves to a moment where we were invincible. We were just incredible, knocking it out. We don't have to overthink the tone. That'll pick up. And just one more quick thing. The funny thing about it is when the mind is acting, the body doesn't know. See, the body doesn't know when the mind is acting. So when you can get here, this follows. Everything else begins to follow. And that's where I've been really seeing some interesting successes over the last 5-6 years as I've been working on this is, wow, there's a lot of acting that goes into this.
It's funny you should say this because a couple of weeks ago in the sales school, we published a workshop on non-verbal influence. And it sounds really fascinating. I love all the nerdy side of all this and how to spot if someone's lying to you and things like this. And the conclusion of the workshop was, from all my research and all the research of the team who helped with the scripts, Max and everyone else involved, it was method acting, as you alluded to there. And it seems like there's a reasonable amount of scientific research on this as well, that when you either visually in your brain with your eyes closed, rehearse something, perhaps going into the meeting and having a successful conversation, or obviously athletes do this before they do a race, they visualize themselves winning. And clearly these are kind of small elements to the bigger picture of method acting. Well, studies show that you can physically change your brain neurochemistry by doing these things. You can reprogram certain parts of your brain, make new connections. I'm going to butcher this, and I'm always hesitant to butcher studies because I'm passionate about sharing actual science as opposed to anecdotes. But one of the studies showed that people learnt piano in 20% of less time than a control group who was learning by just playing physically, by rehearsing for an hour a day just by visualizing the keys. They learned 20% faster. Clearly, doing an extra hour of physical playing piano would get them even quicker than that. But the study was to show that you can physically change your brain structure by visualization. So this blows my mind. I'm glad we're both on the same kind of wavelength, to use a pun unintentionally there with this, Rob. What else can we do, whether it's tactically, whether it's a mindset thing? What can we do, perhaps even before we walk into the meeting, to set ourselves up to be congruent and to be believable when we sit down with multiple people in a boardroom and we're selling, pitching a product or a service?
Okay. And I'm going to give you sort of a series of ideas and tactics, but can I just give you a 30,000 foot view real fast?
Sure.
And I think this fits into a lot of what you do and what we do. Sometimes everyone's looking for the magic pill. What's going to get us there? So I was just working on an article that'll come out Friday, and I think it's called Playing the Percentages or something. But, you're drinking a cup of coffee or tea there, and, I'm assuming you put a sweetener in. Well, we all know that if we go with stevia or Truvia or something, it's a little healthier, right? If that's the only thing we did for our health, that wouldn't really help. But we start actually stacking those things up in terms of our health, what we eat, when we exercise, all these different things that don't guarantee success, but combined, they do well. Well, why can't we take that into this world that we're talking about? So, for instance, what we just mentioned, getting our mind right, I don't know whether that's going to make you 3% better or 6% better. I know one thing for a fact: it will not make you worse. So what I've decided is I want people to realize that we're actually we're looking for little opportunities to increase our chances of success. And my new motto is, if you don't want those percentages, give them to me. I want them. I want all of them. I'm going to take yours. I'm going to give them to people who need them. But we sort of forget that these performance skills, I don't like the word soft skills, it's not one or two, it's a collection of tactics. So now to answer your question, you mentioned, okay, what are some other things? Well, what about focusing on our pitch? What about focusing on the pace of our voice? What about focusing on where we actually pause when we speak?
Okay,
Things that may come naturally to you and
let's
me.
jump
Yeah.
into those three things because they do not come naturally to me. And as you just, the interview as it's gone so far, I feel I've already gone at 500 mile an hour with no brakes and blah, 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 blah in that last anecdote I give you. So I'll take this on board and I'll put it into practice for the rest of the interview, Rob. What do we need to do with our pace, our intonation, I think is the right word, and the pauses? How do we make ourselves, I don't even want to say more believable, but how do we communicate better with these, which then leads to more credibility over the course of a conversation?
Great. Okay. So what I do when I'm training people now is we work on them one at a time. For instance, with pitch, we do exercises that where we take simple words like yes or no or I'll take care of it. And what we do is we intentionally push them slow. We push them a little bit quicker. We push them even slower. We push them even faster. We actually overact and underact. And what it does is it begins to move the meter ever so slightly. Real important. What we don't want to do is take somebody who is, let's say, let's go with a 1 to 10 scale. And let's, just for the sake of argument, because I'm a fairly arrogant guy, let's put me at the 8 to 9 category. A little bit of bounce in the voice, certainly nonverbals, etc. Okay. But many people are operating at a 6. That's good. Some at a 3. All we want to do is take that 3. Let's make it a 5. Take the person who's a 5. Let's add a point and a half to you as well. So we're not trying to take somebody who's normally somewhat reserved and turn them into a jumping jack. What we're trying to do is just move them up a scale. I don't want to subscribe to the belief that, oh, well, I was born this way. I'm a low reactor. So this is my prison cell that I will sit in and I'm going to be an accountant. It's almost like we're sectioned off in 3rd grade. Like, all right, Jolles, bounce in the voice. You go into the choir over there. You're going to play the trumpet there, Larry. Okay. They already have us labeled. What we have to remember is that all we're trying to do is, even with, as the example I gave, with pitch, let's just move it a little bit. Still within our style, but let's just move it up a little bit. Same with a pace, for instance. What I actually train people to do is let's look over some things, some common things we say, some anchor statements, things that most companies are fairly comfortable with. Xerox, what do you do when the machine breaks down? We have kind of a set way of answering that. We'll say it pretty much the same way every time. But what I want to figure out is, okay, for those of you who can't hear it, let's actually manually almost write the music to this. And then we begin to practice. So people start hearing the pitch and the pace. See, and I'll get off my soapbox, but in music, when we can't hear music, sometimes we call, I don't like the term, but we refer to it as being tone deaf. So somebody can go bing, and somebody who can't hear will go, ha ha, since they just can't hear it. But when we communicate, there's almost a level of that inability to hear it. But the good news is it's not music, and they don't have to sing it. They just have to stretch a little bit. So it's a series of exercises.
Well, I think your music metaphor summed and I'm consciously trying to use pauses here, sums it up for me because I play drums. So there's not much tone to them, unfortunately. If I haven't even said that, I bet if you played piano or guitar, I bet you would have the potential to understand this a little, even if it's just intuitively, to understand the kind of the pitch of your voice a little bit kind of differently than someone who has no experience with that. But would that be fair to say? I mean, I'm massively generalizing and stretching this there.
No, it's absolutely fair to say. And think about what we do naturally, at least on my side. Frequently, I can't see the person I'm talking to. So what do I do with my pitch and my pace? I intentionally, sometimes unconsciously, as I'm finishing an answer, what do? I begin to slow it down and drop the pitch. And without seeing me, Jolles is done. Time for me to talk now. So we do this all the time, you see. But for those who can't hear it, we're just teaching them those sounds. And quite frankly, when I got the book going, the first group I worked with were not salespeople. They were people who were chronically unemployed. To be in the class, they had to be at least 2 years unemployed. Most of the class was 4 and 5. 12 people, and 10 of them were hired within 2 months. What do you think? We worked on their elevator pitch? No, they had the words. They didn't know the tune. What we did was for 2 days, I actually tried to teach them not only how to hear it, but then how to quickly and spontaneously find it. Because unfortunately, we can't mark it up as we go. So that's just a step in. Then we got to start acquiring that a little bit more naturally.
Cool. I'm going to, as I say this, I'm going to start to try this episode, and the audience can laugh as I attempt to do it. I'm going to slow down and drop the pace when I finish a sentence. Something like that, right?
Well, you actually did that when you.
I can see you wincing as I do it.
Yeah. No, I was smiling, but you went, I'm going to do this and drop the pace as I commit. You actually slowed it and dropped it when you did it. So yeah, but I'll be watching you for the rest of the interview.
You be watching me. It's going to go out the window about 4 seconds in as I carry on the conversation, Rob. But that, alas, back to the kind of the belief element of all of this. Are salespeople naturally on the back foot when they go into any conversation because they've got sales in their job title on their business card? Is this something that we should consider? Is this something that we should perhaps see if we can change if we do have sales in our job title? Is this something that is always going to be kind of starters not at the bottom of the mountain, but kind of back at base camp whenever we start any conversation with regards to believability?
Yeah. Okay. So we all know that there has always been a perception problem in sales. And maybe that's because when we were 16 or 17 and we're looking for our first car, we wound up on a used car lot, and maybe not that they're all bad, but some of them not so good. So we got exposed to kind of a lower level of sales as we got going. And we could do a whole interview on perception and why and who and how. But I would caution people to say this. And remember what we talked about, playing the percentages. I know this sounds corny, but I'm going to walk into a room and I have no idea what's on the other side of that door. Am I going to let my perception jump ahead of me, think that, well, the last two I went on weren't very good, and one person was downright mean to me, so I know how this is going to go. I can't imagine that's going to increase our chances of success. But I have something in the book that I love that I wrote, a piece that when we write books, every word is very important, but an author will actually like little pieces that are their favorites. And one of mine is a conversation about playing the course and not the opponent. I'm not a great golfer, but if you watch professional golfers, they don't even look at the scoreboard. They don't look at it for 3.5 days. They may look with 1 or 2 holes to go because now they have to kind of figure out where they are. Now, as a basketball player and as a coach, how could I play a game without looking at the scoreboard? But in golf, it's very intelligent because what they're really realizing is I'm not playing against that opponent. I'm playing the course. If that opponent is amazing, they're amazing. How would me stressing out and worrying about that actually change my game? It'll be a distraction. Now, let's take that concept and think about that door I just pointed at. We don't know. We're letting, I love a saying that says, worry is the misuse of your imagination. We're misusing our imagination quite frequently. If we're right and it's a disaster, well, we're going in guns a-blazing anyway. But usually we're not. And what we do is we go in with our shoulders slumped, and you're going to give salespeople a hard time like the last guy, right? And it comes out in that pitch. It comes out in that pace and those pauses, and we don't sound believable. What if we just don't misuse our imagination, go in there and control what we can control, which is everything we've learned, our effort, our product knowledge, our sales tactics. Let's just go in and play the best round of golf we can. And then go ahead and bet against me. I think you'd make a mistake if you do.
And so what does that look like physically? And I can give an example, an anecdote for me of if I had a bad sales call in medical devices, I was going from kind of hospital to hospital or from operating theatre to operating theatre, specifically hospital to hospital in this example, I would do what anyone who watches the US version of The Office will have seen this and probably laughed as a salesperson of Dwight Schrute in his car, headbanging to ridiculous, I think it was Motley Crue or some kind of pop cheese rock from the 80s. And I would do this myself, and I would go, right, okay, that was shit, that was terrible, that was not the best version of me, that was, it was the best version of me, and it wasn't appropriate for the scenario, somebody else came in, whatever it was, I'd take responsibility for it, I'd listen to for me, it'd be kind of pop punk or like punk rock from the 90s, from the early 2000s, and that would get me back in the right frame of mind, and it would be my reset button, and I'd have a big grin on my face, and in between podcast recordings, I do exactly that. I'll listen to 2 or 3 kind of fast punk songs, and that gets me going. It's probably why I speak so fast after kind of listening to that music, and I need to slow it down to build my levels of rapport with the guests and the audience. But with that said, Rob, is that what we should be doing when we have a bad meeting, or is there a less, is there a more subtle way of going about resetting ourselves?
I think there's a really good process piece that we can use. I don't want to keep pushing at the book, but it's in there because, my dad used to tell me, and it was really wonderful. And it's one of these wonderful memories I have of my father, where he would tell me, if I got knocked down, if I got beat, he would tell me, get it behind you, boy, get it behind you, get it behind you. But I it's a wonderful saying, but it's missing a few words. And the few words that he's missing are, learn from what just happened here and then get it behind you, boy. Okay. So my thinking is this, no matter how successful or unsuccessful that call is, why can't we be a little kinder to ourselves? Again, if I thought beating myself up would make me better, I would beat the heck out of me. But I know that's not true. So why are we so mean? Why can't we process and say, I don't care how successful or unsuccessful. I'm going to try and figure out the 2 best things that just happened in there. I'm going to figure out the 2 things that I would do differently if I could walk in there again. I'm going to come to grips with that, and then I'm going to get it behind me and plow forward. But it's such a wasted opportunity. What worries me is if we don't do that, we run the risk of being what I call a professional victim, which is another lousy client, and they don't know what they're doing. See, I'm not learning anything right now. It's their fault in the economy, by the way. And Trump has got we can blame it on everyone, but now we're going to walk in and just basically keep repeating the mistakes that we're making. We have to evolve. We have to work on ourselves. And that means if we balance our feedback, in other words, I was terrible at this, I'm not going to learn anything beating myself up. Balance maybe 2 and 2. That's small. We do that every time. How can we not get a lot better, a lot faster?
Have you read the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by, I think it's Dr. Robert Glover?
I've heard of Glover, but I haven't read that book.
Okay, so that book covers some of this, but from a different angle of perhaps some solutions, but more the psychology behind, especially why guys become nice guys. And one of the reasons I want to bring this up is we touched on telling lies, or perhaps not full out and out lies in B2B sales, but perhaps people tell little fibs, little white lies. And he suggests in the book that people are trained to do this from a young age because it removes them from responsibility. And it allows them to kind of go, well, I'll beat myself up or I'll blame someone else rather than just dealing with things head on. Clearly, to be more believable, we can't have individuals thinking that we might be telling white lies and that we might be brushing problems under the carpet. How important is this in the grand scheme of things? Is it so and this is I used to tell little white lies all the time rather than take responsibility for things. And it's been for more so when I was a kind of teenager. But as I've grown up and grown a bit older, it's something that I've proactively had to work on to deal with confrontation up front rather than let it stew, because typically it gets worse over time. So for B2B salespeople who perhaps avoid the consequences of things, will say essentially my dog ate the paperwork rather than just say, well, I just didn't get time to do it, things like this. How important is it to be just straight down the middle, not to tell lies, not to tell fibs, not to try and spin the truth when you're trying to build credibility with a potential B2B prospect and long-term business partner?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this out of both sides of my mouth a little bit. All right, I'm going to start by saying, gosh, I'd love to look at you and say, we must never lie. But, I'll just use the classic when your wife says, how do I look in this? So don't tell me that we don't have, that there isn't a little gray in our conversation. That said, I really believe that telling the truth is almost takes a level of discipline, because the mind fools us. We say, well, they didn't really ask that, or we did that Tuesday, maybe not Wednesday. We find little outs, little niches to say, I'm kind of telling the truth, and I think that's what you say when you use the words little white lies. If I said, does your product go to 11 and it goes to 4, you're not going to lie to me. But if you're going to say, do people really like this? You're going to say, well, the guy on the subway did. I mean, yeah. Okay. So there's this gray area. What worries me about the gray areas and the discipline is it's just like the snooze bar. I know this sounds strange, but I never hit a snooze bar. You know what? Never. I don't even know where it is. I don't hit it because I'm afraid the next day it's going to be easier to hit it again. And I made a commitment before I went to bed to get up at this particular time. Why would the first decision of the day to procrastinate? So I'm actually a little OCD-ish, I call it, which means I do certain things because I'm nervous that when we do things that aren't right and we let that cat out of the box, it's so much easier the next day. That voice gets louder going, well, come on now. And besides, these guys, I don't like listening to that voice, so I don't want to give it even open the door a little bit. And that's the thing. It's not that I'm a saint. I get that there's a gray area, but I will say this, boy, what a slippery slope we begin to slide down when we start justifying lies. One thing, we're 10 seconds, but I'm an obscure guy here because I trained almost 1,000 polygraph examiners in my career, and I actually watched the anatomy of lying. I watched from behind glass. I watched people justify the lies. That's how it's done. An embezzler, when they crack, the first thing, and I saw 2 of them do it, said was, he left the safe open, or he has more money than all of us combined. Still embezzlement. But see what the mind does? It begins to justify. That's the danger.
Okay, so most important question to ask after that, Rob. How do we beat a polygraph?
Oh, that's the most important one.
We'll come back to sales and a lot of stuff in a second, but how do we beat a polygraph?
Well, first, I hope you're not sitting one in the next couple of weeks. But you know what? Let's make lemonade out of that question. All right. The best, I hit you right with it. I'm going to repeat it again. I think the best way to beat a polygraph is to tell the truth. I know. I'm sorry. But beating it means you think you're going to lie on the polygraph. Just so you know, a polygraph can take 3 hours. Okay. The actual test questions might be 20 minutes. There's a lot of pre-test and a lot of post-test. It's really difficult. They're calibrating that system pretty carefully. It's not as easy as 1, 2, 3. And although it's not admissible in court, the only reason it isn't, they're pretty accurate, is they just haven't standardized their testing. But that's what's holding back. I don't think you want to be messing with that, trying to beat a polygraph.
Well,
tell the truth.
That was disappointing, that, Rob. I was expecting that you clench up, or you do something, or you think about you being on a beach with a bunch of women in bikinis bringing you beer that takes your mind off things, whatever it is. But yeah, if the answer is difficult, then we'll leave it with that. Okay, so kind of thing.
I might not be telling the truth, by the way. I may know how to beat it. I'm not telling you.
Well, let's wrap up with this then. Let's turn the conversation on its head slightly. How can we tell without a polygraph whether the person that we are speaking to is not necessarily whether they're telling the truth or not, but whether they are a believable person, whether they are a credible person? Is there a way to tell this without having to give them a task and see if they come back and actually do it? Is there a way to kind of suss this out quickly by observing them or kind of through a conversation?
That's an amazing question. That really is. That you got me working on that one because I'm working on the other side of the fence. I never really looked at, okay, if it's coming at me. I really do believe that as a salesman, let's talk salesman to salesman. The reason why we ask those background questions early, the reason why we ask those easy questions, I'm not burrowing in hard with what's not working here or what difficulties you have over there. Everybody has a story. I want to hear your story. I'm coming in very wide open. Why do we do that when you think about it? In a sense, we're calibrating the conversation. And because these are easy questions. Now, we know there's plenty been written of where the eyes are going to go up into the corner when they're searching for facts that don't really exist. There's some nonverbals. That's above my pay grade a little bit. I think what I noticed is facially, and there are studies that say, in terms of the emotional impact of the message, 7% words, 38% nonverbals, but 55%, in a sense, of nonverbal facial expressions. So one man's opinion, I'll watch that face probably more than I'll listen. And I think that's what's going to give them away. Probably not the tone, particularly if they're good at it, meaning they've told this lie a lot. Have you ever been with somebody where you went, that person, sometimes it's a sibling, by the way, but that person has told this lie so long, they actually believe that lie. They now believe it. It's become part of their fabric. But I really do think that's the way to go about it. But that's a little above my pay grade.
I know for me, I have a real obvious tell, and it was my girlfriend who sussed this out. My nostrils flare when I'm lying. So it's rare that I'd lie to her, but when I'm bantering with her, when I'm winding her up, when I'm taking the mick and having a laugh with her, she immediately calls me out on whatever that I'm joking about, and I can see her eyes drop from kind of looking back into my eyes, looking at my nose. So if I'm doing that, I'm sure people have some kind of
everybody has a tell. Yeah, real fast. My daughter has a tell. It's been hysterical. She's 25 now. We finally told her, but she's not telling the truth. She gestures out of rhythm, meaning right now we're going to do this, this, and this. She gestures out of rhythm and says, I want to do this, this, and this. And it's actually, as a parent, it's one of the sweetest things in the world. And so now when I talk to her, I go, okay, now, how we doing here? Because I know the hand it loses track of it, loses its rhythm. I don't think it's a perfect science. I think everyone will know. I'm probably going to be safe with the facial expressions. And part of that face is your nostrils, for instance, which is absolutely hysterical to me.
Yeah,
it's very funny.
But hopefully people can't see from hopefully people can see from the video. They'll see if I'm telling a fib on the podcast. That'll be one for the eagle-eyed. In fact, if you ever see my nostrils flaring when I ask a question or tell an anecdote, leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube, and I'll get back to you and give you the real scoop behind why the reason I was trying to spin the thing. But with your daughter, it's almost like, have you ever seen a Jackie Chan or a Bruce Lee film where it's been overdubbed in English after the fact? That's what it reminded me of as you were describing that.
That's what it looks like. Oh, it's not even close. But I even sometimes when she was younger, I look at my wife and just go, because we knew this is some spin we're getting on this one. But anyway, yeah, I think people have tell. I would say safe on the face, but let's make sure for us at least we keep it authentic. Remember, even if it's a product, we talked about ourselves, but even if it's a product, figure out how to fix that product. Maybe that's not the product for this client, but don't blame the product. If the product isn't right, then don't sell the product and figure out how, as a company, as a people, we get it right. But, like I said, insurance is a fabulous product. I'm not so sure I'd have a bunch of 21-year-olds selling it, but a fabulous product. We just have to get in touch with for who and when.
Rob, I've got one final question, and then the final question to ask everyone, and I've asked you before, and that is on time, both a length of a meeting, perhaps, or number of meetings, or number of occasions, and meeting face to face or on the phone or wherever it is. Is there a cadence that we need to put in place to build? There might be a different definition that separates trust and believability. There might be separate things. I'm not sure. They might be one and the same. But do we have to meet someone 4.5 times for 20 minutes a pop before they consider us believable? Or can this be kind of an instant, like a light switch moment for us?
I think that's going to depend on the personalities in the room. You know, they say the easiest person to sell is a salesperson. I'm fairly easy to sell because I'm pulling for you. But, we're watching for a couple of things. The first time you and I ever spoke, and I hope that you never have an interview with somebody talking about sales where the words asking questions and listening don't come up at least once. So let's bring them up real fast, and let's remind ourselves that that's very logical, what we're saying, not really instinctive. But remember, with that, we get the person talking. The more the person talking, the more trust they're having for the person they're talking to. So sometimes in terms of structure, it's really not only am I learning a lot by listening to you, your personality. I'm learning how believable you are, but we've got to remind ourselves that it's not how much we know. It's we have a guy named Billy Mays. He passed away. He was a pitch man, for OxyClean and all these things. We're not pitching. We're listening, and that really will help us a great deal in terms of figure out. Okay, let's get into the anatomy of this individual and figure out not only what they're doing, how they're doing it, but them as a personality. How much detail am I going to have to go into? Are they analytical? Are they social? We're going to slow down a little bit. And most importantly, from our delivery stamp, pause more. Pause more. I did a 2-day program. I broke my heart, but he said, best thing I learned in 2 days was I need to pause more.
Yeah.
We do it when we're just socializing because we're processing. But in sales, we just run through stop signs. Pause more. You'll be more believable and you'll be able to hear it a little bit better if you do. Pause.
Perfect. That is getting burnt into my mind as I kind of go through this. I've got a couple more interviews for today, so I'm going to focus on pausing more and see if the audience makes if that makes any difference to them. See if they notice or not. That'll be interesting. That'll be an experiment I'll do on the backside of things. But we wrap, Rob. Before you tell us about the book, I've got one final question for you, mate, and that is: if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him? What would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become more believable?
Well, give me a moment. I'm jumping in the Wayback Machine. I think, and I know this sounds strange, it's almost a little political piece. I think I would sit myself down because I was I still am a very principle-driven person. And when I saw wrong, I made it right. And when I saw a team moving in a direction that I didn't think was the right direction, I thought I will be the courageous one and fight to the bitter end here. And I'd love to put my arm around that young man who had all the right, I had the right idea. But I would love to tell him that courage isn't necessarily from pushing your ideas forward. Courage is maybe allowing the team to grab the second best idea today and learn how to professionally disagree, not just with my team, but with my client, and not worry about being right all the time. I think that's what I'd want to examine.
Perfect. That is, I don't think anyone's said anything along those lines before, so I appreciate that, Rob. And with that, mate, tell us a little bit more about the book, because clearly, if you've enjoyed this conversation, the book is the next step for you, Sales Nation. And with that, tell us where we can find the book and a little bit more about it.
This is the book. I'm very proud of this book. And I'm proud of all my books. They're a little bit like my children, but Customer-Centered Selling was a book that taught us the words, how to sell. I'm very proud of that book. And How to Change Minds was my most recent book, and it really got into the ethics behind why we do what we do. We have to ask difficult questions, and we have to be all in on that. So we need to know why that's not mean, it's merciful. But this book is personal because this book obviously has the ability to help anybody who's struggling in their communication. But I say this, including me, we're all 3 or 4 major jolts away from losing our tune. And something, even when it's very natural to us, losing that tune. And to be able to get in and examine not only how to believe in ourselves, how to get others to believe in us, but how to sustain it. I'm ready to fight hard for this book, and I'm quite proud of it. And Brian Tracy wrote the foreword, and I'm eternally grateful because that's the top of the mountain, at least in the States here. I'm really honored to have Brian's voice in this book.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to the book. It's available on Amazon, everywhere else as well. Link to the book, your website, and a few other places in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Rob, I want to thank you for your time, your insights on this, which are genuinely unique. So I appreciate that, mate. I appreciate kind of all the hustle that you're doing to get the book out there because clearly it gives us a lot of value as well. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us again on the Salesman Podcast.
Pleasure. I'm going to be watching those nostrils of yours too.